Hi, this is Tradu, and welcome to my Vexie and the Geargrinders Mythic guide for Shadow Priest. On the talent side, you'll be playing Voidweaver with Shadow Crash for the bikes. You can technically pick Silence if you really want to help with the ads in the intermission, but it's one kick for each phase, so it's not going to be that much of a difference. On the class side, you'll be playing defensive stuff. Shackle doesn't work on the mechanical Mythic ads, so don't bother speccing into it. And outside of that, we don't really have any relevant utility. Now for your gear, the main slots that you're going to care about are obviously the trinkets, where you want one unused trinket because the fight has damage amps, and then one good passive trinket, whichever one you happen to have. Your active options are basically House of Cards, Signet of the Priory, or the PvP badge in roughly that order. And then for your passive trinkets, just any good one. Eye of Kazan is going to be pretty good, even though it's an early fight, because the fight is fairly long early in the season. And then there's another item which is quite good on this fight, which is the Mechagon Braces, because again, you have the damage amp where you get 2 extra Void Blasts thanks to the Braces, and you don't care quite as much about the DPS loss outside of your CDs. So those are worth using if you have them. Don't grind them just for the first boss, but if you happen to have them, use them. Now for your DPS CDs, this fight is actually pretty nice for those because you can also change the timings of the damage amp by sending the last bike into the boss late to remove the final armor plate, or early. This means that you can delay the first one until around 2 minutes, which is where people have their cooldowns ready again, and then you press Bloodlust, you press your potion, and you blast the boss really hard. Then the next damage amp you want to send as quickly as possible, because that way, again, you have your 2-minute CDs ready. And then the final damage amp, you have options. Either you again send it as quickly as possible, because that way it'll line up with 2 minutes that come up just then, or you can try to delay it as long as humanly possible, because that way it'll line up with your second potion of the fight. So that's really the call you make. If you don't delay the last one, you just potion afterwards if the boss is still alive and are slightly sad, but it is what it is. For Shadow, this means that you use PI on pull and then on each damage amp, and then you have a Dark Ascension in between damage amp, except for the final one, where you might have 2 Dark Ascensions in between if you milk it a lot. And as I mentioned, your potions are in the first and third damage amp ideally, or in the first damage amp and after the third damage amp somewhere. You also want to use your Vampiric Embrace during the damage amp phases because people are taking damage and you are doing a lot of damage, so that's where you'll do the most healing and it'll be the most relevant. Then you have your defensive CDs, which I don't have in this plan because you just fade anytime anything targets you, and you use your Desperate Prayer generally in the intermission phases as well, because there's not that much damage going out in the main phases. If you get targeted by the Fire Barrage thing that burns the oil, you can just disperse if you want to, because it's kind of rough to move during it, even with instants, because it shoots so quickly. So you can just go Dispersion, walk around in the oil, burn it away, and then go back to DPSing afterwards. Now for the actual strategy, just a quick overview. We started with the boss on blue. We drop the first 2 oils on purple and orange, and then we gate over to green. This way the bikes are forced to spawn on orange, go through the oil, which breaks their charge so it doesn't do damage anymore, and go towards green and be stacked up there so we can just AoE them down. The rest of the fight just gets played on green, where we deal with all of the ads, burn the oil, and so on. Once you've reached the corner, you have 2 main mechanic groups to deal with. One of them is the bikes, and the other one is the oil. The bikes are pretty simple. You bait them in the corner. The charge doesn't do anything because they went through oil, so you can just stay where you were. You Shadow Crash, ideally all 3 of them, sometimes fewer, and just manually deal the rest. And then you hit the boss because that's how Psychic Link works. Once the bike dies, it drops 2 canisters of oil. Those canisters need to be soaked and put back into the bike, and then the bike can charge into the boss. You don't want to stand in the overlap of 2 canisters because that can waste one of the canisters and delay your phase, which might not be something you want. And yeah, once you've sent enough bikes into the boss, it phases into the intermission. But first there's the other mechanic, which is the oil and the fire. For the oil, you want to drop it off to the side usually, and then just leave it to get burned later. Sometimes you need to refill in the middle to make the bike spin out, but it's not that common, mostly in the second half of the fight roughly. With the oil, you can stutter step out, you have plenty of time, but with the fire you don't really. You need to have a lot of instants or just press Dispersion, because it shoots very quickly. And then once you've done that, you can move back into the corner and play with the rest of the team again. In the burn phase on Mythic, there's the new ad, which you can't interact with, so don't even bother thinking about it. Outside of that, what you do is you Shadow Crash the small ads, so you can get Twist of Fate, and you pop all your CDs and hit the boss really hard, and then you dodge some swirlies, maybe you press some Psychic Screams or Silences to stop the ads, but most of the time you're just hitting the boss as hard as you possibly can. Once you've repeated this 3 times, and then eventually killed the boss, you also have the small baby boss jumping out of the car, which you need to kill, and that's when you get to collect all of your nice shiny purples. Hopefully this video was useful and you learned something, and I'll see you next time for Cauldron of Carnage.